Hello guys, welcome back to this class. For those who just joined us, welcome to Anatomy Book Club, the platform where you make your anatomy simple, the platform for learners and knowledge seekers. So feel free to join us across all our social media platforms. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about the 3D lung anatomy. The 3D lung anatomy. Alright, that's what we're going to be focusing on today. We'll be talking about the lungs, then we'll talk about the trachea, a little about the pleura, and that's all we'll be talking about today. The lung, the pleura, and the tracheobronchial tree, and also we'll be talking about the bronchopulmonary segment. So I want you to follow up with the class to the end. Alright, I'm going to share with you guys a material at the end of this class. Alright, so you're going to find a link in the description box below. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the lungs. We know that the lungs happen to be a vital organ of respiration. Alright, what it does is actually to getting inspired air containing oxygen, more of oxygen. It contains nitrogen and other gases, but it contains important gas called oxygen. Alright, it brings this oxygen in contact with the venous blood in the pulmonary capillaries. You get pulmonary capillaries is usually around the alveolar, so it brings this oxygen in close contact with this venous blood. So that's what the lungs does. Alright, so if you notice here now, you can see this is the anterior aspect of the thoracic wall, right? And here you find the lungs in the pulmonary cavity. These are the lungs, right and left lungs. Then you have your heart found in the mediastinum, right? You can see the heart found in the mediastinum. Then you can find all these bones here. This is clavicle, this is scapula. Then you find your thoracic vertebra posterior. You can't find it here. Then you find the lumbar vertebra display here. Then you can find the ribs, right? So now this structure now covering the lungs is the pleura. We have two pleuras, two layers of pleura. You have the parental pleura and you have the visceral pleura. Alright, so for the parental pleura, it's usually adhering to the internal surface of the thoracic wall, but it's usually separated from the thoracic wall. That's what make up the thoracic wall: the bones, the intercostal muscles, that's the ribs, the ribs and part of the thoracic vertebra, the intercostal muscles, and the vessels there. Those are structures that make up the thoracic wall. So the pleura, parental pleura, is separated from the thoracic wall by the endothoracic fascia. So first of all, you're going to come across the thoracic wall, then deep to it you come across the endothoracic fascia, then deep to it you come across the parental pleura, that's in the region of the pulmonary cavity. Alright, then you come across the visceral pleura and then the lungs itself. Alright, so this you can find here is the parental pleura. Alright, having different parts. You have the cervical part here, which is above the rib 1. It extends into the root of the neck. Alright, usually around 2 to 3 centimeters above the medial third of the clavicle. Alright, then you can find the costal pleura here, that is in contact with the costal part. The ribs is in relation with the ribs. Then you have the mediastinal pleura here, which is found in the lateral aspect of the mediastinum. This is the posterior aspect, and this is the thoracic vertebra you can find. This is the pleura, the parental pleura. You can see deep to it is the viscera, then the lungs itself. Then you can find the heart, right? You can find the heart. You can find the scapula here. Then these are the ribs, and these are the lumbar vertebra. This is the posterior aspect of the thoracic wall. Now this is the lateral aspect. You can find the lungs itself here. You can find the lungs. This is the sternum. Then the mediastinum is just posterior to it. The mediastinum is the cavity posterior to the sternum. Alright, extending down to the thoracic vertebrae posteriorly. Alright, Then look at the lumbar vertebra. These are the ribs. Alright. So now let's talk about the trachea, and let's talk about the tracheobronchial tree. Alright, that's what we're going to talk about right now, the tracheobronchial tree. So I'm going to show you guys something before that. Alright. This is the tracheobronchial tree. Alright. Tracheobronchial tree consists of the trachea and the bronchis. Alright, that's why it's called the tracheobronchial tree. What it does is the passageway through which inspired air it passes through. The inspired air passes through this passageway down into the lungs. Alright, so it's just like a passageway, it's tube like. So the first structure is the trachea. Alright, the trachea, and the trachea is usually made up of C-shaped hyaline cartilages. Alright, and it has a free end supported by the trachealis muscle. Histologically, in the internal aspect of it, if you study your histology, we have a video on the histology of the trachea. You can watch that video. Alright, the link is found in the description box below. You can watch that video on the histology of the trachea, alright, and the lungs also. So it's usually made up of ciliated pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Innervation is coming from the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and blood supply, arterial supply, is coming from the tracheal branch of the inferior thyroid artery, and it drains into this venous drainage goes into the brachiocephalic vein, the azygos vein, and the accessory azygos vein. So this trachea is around 10 cm long, so it extends down to the sternal angle. When it gets to the sternal angle, what happens? It bifurcates into two branches. It bifurcates into a right pulmonary bronchus and a left pulmonary bronchus. The right pulmonary bronchus is usually vertical. Alright, it's more vertical than the left, and that's why substance that's passing through this airway goes more easily through the right pulmonary bronchus. For example, people that smoke, for example, smokers, they usually have the tendency of allowing easy passage of all those particles into their right lungs more than the left lung. So you have the right pulmonary bronchus and the left pulmonary bronchus. So before entering into the ileum of the lungs, so I'm going to talk about the ileum of the lungs shortly. Right, before entering into the ileum of the lungs, the right pulmonary bronchus divides into three branches. It divides into secondary bronchi. So from pulmonary bronchus to secondary bronchi, we have, the right lung has three lobes. Alright, it has three lobes, which we've talked about. It has a superior lobe, inferior lobe, and a middle lobe. So it has a superior lobe, a middle lobe, and an inferior lobe. So this right pulmonary bronchus is going to divide into a superior secondary bronchus, middle secondary bronchus, and the inferior secondary bronchus. Or secondary bronchus, secondary can be also called lumbar. So it's either superior lumbar bronchus, middle lumbar bronchus, and the inferior lumbar bronchus. Alright, but for the left pulmonary bronchus divides at the ileum into two. It divides into two branches. It's split into two branches: the superior secondary or lumbar bronchus and the inferior secondary or lumbar bronchus. So this secondary or lumbar bronchus, for the name lumbar, it supplies the lobes. So superior will give out segmental branches to the superior lobe. Middle will give out segments to the middle lobe. The inferior will give out segmental branches to the inferior lobe. Then for the left, superior will give to the superior lobe, and inferior gives to the what? Inferior lobe. Now, remember we talked about the segments, pulmonary segments of the lung, right? So now let's talk about that in details before we come back into this. So what have we talked about now? The trachea bifurcating into two at the sternal angle, right primary bronchus and left primary bronchus. Right primary divides into three: superior, middle, and inferior. While the left divides into what? Superior and inferior. So now let's go back to this. So this is what we're talking about here. You can find your trachea, that is just a continuation of the larynx. Alright, it's just a continuation of the larynx. It extends from this cricoid cartilage. This is the cricoid cartilage you can find here. So you extend down to the sternal angle. So when it gets to the sternal angle, it bifurcates into two branches. It bifurcates into right primary bronchus and the left primary bronchus, which you can find here, right? Then the primary bronchus for the right side divides into three branches: a superior, secondary or lumbar bronchus, a middle, secondary or lumbar bronchus, and an inferior, secondary or lumbar bronchus. The superior further divides into three branches that will supply the different segments, which we are going to talk about soon. This branch is called the apical branch, that will supply the apical segment. This is called the anterior branch, that will supply the anterior segment of the superior lobe, and this is called the posterior branch, which will supply the posterior segment of the superior lobe. Then you have this middle dividing into two. You have this other branch supplying the medial segment, and you have this branch supplying the lateral segment. Please don't mind the noise, my dog making some kind of noise at the back. Alright, so I just hope it doesn't continue. So you have this one divided into the what? Medial and the lateral. Then you have this inferior secondary or lumbar bronchus dividing into branches. It has a superior branch supplying the superior segment of the inferior lobe. Then you have this medial one supplying the medial segment of the inferior lobe. Then you have the anterior branch supplying the anterior segment of the inferior lobe. Then you have this supplying the lateral, supplying the lateral branch of the inferior lobe. Alright, so these are the branches. Then this segmental bronchi will further divide into bronchioles. Alright, you have a conducting bronchioles, then you have a terminal bronchioles, and then you have a respiratory bronchioles that will further divide into the alveolar. Alright, the alveolar sacs. So now let's go into the posterior view. So this is the posterior view. You can find the trachea here. You can find this free end of the trachea that has connection with the esophagus. So this is where the esophagus usually have a connection with the trachea here. And these are the branches we're talking about. Welcome back. So we're talking about the trachea, the tracheobronchial tree, right? The trachea is a continuation of the larynx extending from this cricoid cartilage down to sternal angle, then bifurcates into two primary bronchi, right and left. Then primary divides into three: secondary bronchi or lobar bronchi, the superior, the middle, and the what? Inferior, right? While the superior is further divided into an apical branch, anterior branch, and posterior branch that supply the respective segments there. And then we have this middle branch. Alright, we have this middle secondary bronchi, secondary bronchioles, because it's one, right? Secondary bronchioles that divides into two branches, right? The medial and the lateral and tertiary or segmental bronchi. Okay, the inferior um, secondary bronchi. You have this inferior secondary bronchioles that divides into these branches. It has a superior branch here, it has a medial branch, it has an anterior branch, a lateral branch, and a posterior branch. Now, when we talk about the left side, we have this primary bronchioles that divides into two secondary bronchi. Do you get? Into two secondary bronchi, the superior for the superior lobe and the inferior for the inferior lobe. Then for the superior bronchus, which supplies the superior lobe, is further divided into an apical branch, a posterior branch, and an anterior branch. And also this branch that give branches to the superior lingual segment, and this that give rise to the inferior lingual segment. While this inferior part of it, the inferior secondary bronchioles, divides further into a superior branch. It has a medial branch, an anterior branch, a lateral branch, and a posterior branch. Alright, so I believe you've gotten these details. So these branches now we are talking about, as we said, is further going to divide into bronchioles, right? Into conducting bronchioles, then it will turn into terminating bronchioles, then it will turn into respiratory bronchioles, and then into the alveolar sacs. Alright, so we're going to talk about the segments when we talk about the lungs in details. You guys, when we talk about the lungs, you're going to see the bronchopulmonary segments. Those bronchopulmonary segments, it's all these segmental bronchi that will supply those segments. Alright, so that's why it's called segmental bronchi or tertiary bronchi. Alright, so this is the posterior view of the tracheobronchial tree. This is the trachea, and this is the right side, and this is the left side. We've all discussed this, right? Here is the primary, this for the right. This is the primary, right? Divided into superior, middle, and inferior. Superior is further divided into, from here now you can see the apical, then you can see the posterior here, you can find the anterior here. Then for the middle secondary bronchioles is divided into what? A medial part and a lateral part here. Then this inferior part is divided into a superior part. Then from here you can find the medial part here, then you can find the anterior part, the lateral part, and the posterior aspect. Then for this left side you have this left primary bronchioles, which divides into two secondary bronchi, a superior and an inferior. Then the superior has what? Has this apical, it has this posterior, it has this anterior, and it has this one for the superiolingual, right? Superiolingual segment. This other one, this segmental branch for the inferior lingual segment. Then this inferior aspect, inferior secondary bronchioles, is divided into a superior part. Then it has a medial part, it has an anterior part, a lateral part, and a posterior aspect. Alright, so I believe you already gotten the details of the tracheobronchial tree. So it's further going to divide as we said, right? So now let's move on to what we have next. This is what we're talking about. All the divisions down till when it forms the what? The alveolar sac. So these are the alveolar sac, the respiratory tract, the respiratory bronchus, then the terminating, then the conducting, then upwards you have what? The tertiary, you have the secondary bronchial, secondary bronchi, then you have the primary and so on. All right. Now this you can find here is what we're talking about here. You can find the primary dividing into what? Into two here. This is the superior and the inferior. You can see it further dividing into segmental. You can see dividing further into segmental branches or segmental bronchi, right? Then further divides into terminating and so on, and it forms what? The alveolar sac. The alveolar sac is surrounded by what? Capillaries, just like you having a ball, and the ball is surrounded by the net. All right, that's how it is. So the net is what forms the capillaries, pulmonary capillaries, and then the ball is inside. So the alveolar sac is all surrounded by the what? Pulmonary capillaries. What's the importance for gaseous exchange? So there will be gaseous exchange at this area. All right, all the oxygenated, that's the inhaled air containing oxygen, comes in here, while the deoxygenated blood comes in through the pulmonary artery into these pulmonary capillaries. So there will be an exchange here. You know, the pulmonary vein will also come into to take in the what? The oxygenated blood that will be formed here. All right. So here you can find this red structure. You can find these blood vessels, these red blood vessels here are the pulmonary what? Veins. Why these ones which are colored green, somehow green, they are the pulmonary what? Arteries. They are the ones bringing in the deoxygenated blood. Why these? They are taking away the what? Oxygenated blood. And all of these structures are passing through the what? Ileum of the lungs, which we are going to talk about soon. This is what we're talking about. You can find this the pulmonary artery taking the deoxygenated blood down to this layer, down to the alveolar level. What happens? This is the alveolar surrounded. Then this, you know that the pulmonary artery now is going to divide. Artery will divide into what? Arteries. Then arteries will divide into what? Capillaries, right? So you have the pulmonary capillaries surrounding the what? Surrounding the alveolar. Then in that region, that's where you find the gaseous exchange occurring. Remember that oxygen will come in with inhaled air, right, into the what? Capillaries. Into the inhaled air will come in into the alveolar, right, to come into the alveolar, and that inhaled air will contain what? Oxygen. So there will be an exchange. The carbon dioxide in the blood goes into the alveolar, while the oxygen in the alveolar goes into the what? Into the capillary. So when it goes into the capillary, what happens? The blood, the oxygen in the blood now flows with the blood into what? Into the pulmonary vein. And when it flows into the pulmonary vein, it's going back to the heart. From the heart, it goes back to all regions, all cells, parts of the body, all organs of the body, and from the organs, the tissues to the what? To the cells. So that's what this is trying to illustrate. So I believe you got this one right. So I believe you got this one right. So let's move on. So we're going to talk about the lungs in details now. We're going to talk about the lungs in details. Like this video if you got some relevant info so far, and drop your comments if you got any questions so far. Alright, so now let's talk about the lungs. You have two lungs, right? The right and the left. You have the right having 3 lobes. It has a superior lobe, an inferior lobe. It has a middle lobe. It has a superior lobe, a middle lobe, and an inferior lobe. This is the anterior view you are seeing here. Then this left has a superior and an inferior lobe. Alright. Then if we further divide, we are going to talk about it in full details. Now you can see the trachea you can see it that bifurcating into pulmonary. So for this side now, this pulmonary bronchial will divide before entering into the ileum. I'm going to show you the ileum of the lung soon. So before entering the ileum, it's going to divide into those secondary bronchi. But for this left side, at the ileum, that's where the division will occur. It will divide into the secondary bronchi. For this side, it's going to have three that will supply these three lobes, right? It's going to have superior, middle, and an inferior. While for the left side, it's going to just have a superior and an inferior, right? So this is the posterior view, and you can see what you see here is the superior lobe, and what you see here is more of the inferior lobe. Alright, then the middle lobe is also there, a small part of it is here. Then you can also find on the left side, you see the superior lobe, and you find the what inferior lobe. Then this is the trachea, right? And the bronchi, pulmonary bronchi, and then secondary divides. So now you can see the right lung having this is the lateral view. That view we looked at before. This one is the anterior view, so you may not see all the lobes clearly. Now let's look at the lateral view. So the lateral view, you can see that it's very obvious. You have a superior lobe, a middle lobe, and an inferior lobe, and you can see that the superior lobe is separated from the middle lobe by a fixture that is running horizontally. This fixture here, this fixture is called the horizontal fixture, right? While you can see the superior and the middle lobe separated from the inferior lobe by this fixture called the oblique fixture. Why is it called oblique? It's running an oblique format, an oblique pattern, so it's called oblique fixture, and you have what, an horizontal fixture. Let's look at the medial aspect of it. You can see the fixture here. This is the oblique feature here, you can see here. Then this is the horizontal feature, you can see. Then this is the superior lobe. This is the superior lobe, you can see here. This is the inferior lobe. This is the middle lobe. So this is the middle lobe, this is superior lobe, and this is inferior lobe. Alright, then this is the oblique feature that is separating the superior and middle from the inferior. Then here you find important structures here. The structures that you find here are usually structures, pulmonary structures, and bronchial structures. That's what you can find here. Alright, so this area is the ileum. This is the ileum of the lung, right? So from this ileum now, look, what are the structures you can find here? Pulmonary vein, which is two. There are two pulmonary veins, superior and inferior. Then you have a pulmonary artery here. Then you can find the pulmonary lymph nodes. These are the lymph nodes here. Then you also find some pulmonary plexus of nerves here too. They are all entering the lungs through this ileum, right? So this is the ileum. So these are the structures. Alright, this is the trachea that will come in and divide into pulmonary bronchi, right? The trachea will divide into pulmonary or bronchi. Alright, so these are the structures that are in relation. Then this is the left. So we're going to talk about the left right now.
Alright, so we're talking about the right and left lung, right? Right has superior lobe, middle lobe, and inferior lobe.
Inferior is not clearly shown here in this anterior view. Then the left has superior and inferior, right? And this is the posterior view. You have a superior lobe for the right. This is the left and this is the right. You have a superior lobe and an inferior lobe. It has a middle lobe also, but it's not clearly shown here. Then you have for the left side a superior lobe and an inferior lobe. Then this is the trachea, right? And the tracheobronchial tree. This is the tracheobronchial tree. Now, looking at the lateral view, you clearly be able to distinguish the lobes. You have the superior, middle, and the what? The posterior. You have the superior, middle, and the inferior, right? Then this is the medial view, right? Where you have the superior here, you have the middle here, and you have the inferior here. Then you have the oblique fixture separating the superior and the middle from the inferior, and then you have the horizontal fixture separating the superior from the middle. Then you find the ilium, right? We've talked about the structures here. The veins, two of them, superior and inferior pulmonary veins, and then pulmonary artery, then the bronchus. In this case, when it's entering into the ilium, it divides into what branches, right? Into three branches, as in the case of the right lungs, it divides into three branches. Then you have these lymphatics here, the lymph nodes, pulmonary lymph nodes, and then the plexus of nerves. They're also here too. They enter through this ilium and they leave through this ilium, the ilium of the lung. These are the structures in relation to the right lung. Now this is the left lung. This is the lateral view of the left lung. You have the superior lobe and the inferior lobe. Then divided, they are separated by this fixture. This fixture is in between them. It's called the oblique fixture, right? There's one thing we need to discuss here. If we should discuss the whole of the lung, right lung, it has parts. Alright, it has parts. It has an apex, which you can see here. It has a base. It has lobes. It has surfaces, and it has borders. This apex, you can see that it is blunt and it's the superior end of it, right? And it extends into the roots of the neck above the rib, above rib 1. Alright, it extends into the root of the neck. Alright, then this base is usually concave. We're going to see the inferior aspect soon. It's usually concave. It lies on the superior surface of the diaphragm. Alright, then for the lobes, we've talked about the superior, middle, and inferior. Then the surfaces, the surface you are seeing right now is the costal surface. Alright, now this surface you see here in the medial view is the mediastinal surface, and then you have the surface that's inferiorly, that is lying on the superior surface of the diaphragm. It's called the diaphragmatic what? Surface. Alright, that's what we are going to talk about. Then now this left lung has an apex too. It has a base. It has surfaces. It even have borders. They have borders too. Alright, this border you can find here is not too obvious. We're going to see it in the other view. Look now. Let me use this view for you. You can see this is the anterior surface, right? This is the inferior surface, you can see here. The medial surface is not too clearly seen here. Then this is a border. This is the border here, right? This is a border, anterior border. This is anterior border. Then there's a posterior border posteriorly, which you will see this posterior border. Then it has two inferior borders. The lateral, the anterior border is usually separating this costal surface from the mediastinal surface. Alright, that's what it does. Then this posterior, that's anteriorly, it separates the costal surface from the mediastinal surface anteriorly, while the posterior border separates the costal surface, which is not obviously seen yet at this area. This posterior border is here. It's separating the costal surface from the mediastinal surface posteriorly. Then you have this inferior border, which there are two of them here. This inferior border, or just say the inferior border. The inferior border is separating the mediastinal surface and the costal surface from the diaphragmatic surface. So the inferior border separates what? The costal surface and the mediastinal surface from the diaphragmatic what surface. Same applies to the what, to the left lung. All right. But if you notice, the anterior border of the left lung is having more of an indentation. You can see, unlike this, this is somehow straight, is somewhat straight for the right side, but for the left side, it's having an indentation. This indentation, you have this notch here called the cardiac notch. So this is where the apex of the heart comes in. Then the base of the heart will come and lie here. So the base of the heart will lie in this area, while the apex will protrude into this what? Into this cardiac notch. So they both have cardiac notch. This cardiac notch is for the base, while this cardiac notch is for the apex. This region now, anterior inferiorly, this cardiac notch is going to form a tongue-like process called the lingula. It's called the lingula. So this tongue-like process called the lingula. So let's go back to what we're trying to talk about. So we've talked about the right lung, right? We've talked about this. We've talked about this. Now what we are in this, right? The left lung, right? The left lung, we said it has an apex, it has a base, it has surfaces. This surface we are seeing here is the costal surface. All right. Then it has lobe, superior lobe and inferior lobe. Then this is the mediastinal surface you are seeing here. Then this is the diaphragmatic surface. Then the borders. The border is not obvious here. Alright. So this is the inferior border you are seeing here. This is the anterior border you are seeing here. Then this is the posterior border. Alright. This is the structure of blood vessels in relation to the left lung. Alright, so this is what I'm trying to describe to also. This is the lung, the right and the left. This has three lobes, superior, middle, and inferior, right? This has just two, superior and what? Inferior. Alright. Then it has borders. It has apex, the apex, it has base, it has surfaces. This you're seeing here is the what? Is the costal surface. That also has a mediastinal surface, which is forming the lateral aspect of the mediastinum. It also has a posterior surface, which is not obvious here, right? Then it has inferior surface too, which is also approximate to the base. It's also called the base. Alright. Then this is the posterior. This you can see now is the posterior surface you are seeing, right? Sorry, there is no posterior surface. It has costal surface, it has the mediastinal surface, and it has what? A diaphragmatic surface. Alright, so this is the posterior view you are seeing here. This is the posterior view. Then these are the lobes demarcated, the superior lobe, middle lobe, and what? Inferior lobe, right? Apex, the base, right? And then you have this border here. Alright. This is the what? Medial view, right? This is the ilium here. This is superior lobe, this is the middle lobe, this is the inferior lobe, right? Then this is the surface, inferior surface or the base, this is the apex, right? Then this is the lateral view of the left lung. So what we looked at now is the medial view. This is the right lung. Let's look at it again. This is the right and left, right? The anterior view. This is the posterior view. Then this is the right lung. This is the lateral view. Then this is the medial view. Then this is the left lung. This is the lateral view, having superior lobe and inferior lobe. It's having a superior lobe and an inferior lobe, separated by the what? Oblique feature. Then this is the medial view, right? Having superior lobe here and the inferior lobe. Then this is the oblique feature you can see here. This is the oblique feature. Then this is the ilium of the left lung. Now let's talk about the bronchopulmonary segment. But before we go into that, I would like to show you guys something first. Alright? So remember we said we'll come back to this, right? The tracheobronchial tree. We've talked about all this, you know what they mean, right? And now look at the segmental, apical, anterior, and posterior. So you are familiar with this by now, right? I believe. Then the middle is divided into medial and lateral, right, which I showed you. Then for the inferior, it has superior, right, superior what? Superior segmental bronchi. Then it has the inferior, it's divided into segments. The anterior one, the one giving segmental branch to the anterior basal segment, middle basal segment, lateral basal segment, and posterior basal segment. Then for the left side, the right and left lobar or secondary bronchi, they will divide into, for the superior, it divide into apical, anterior, posterior, superior lingual, and inferior lingual segmental bronchi. Then for the inferior secondary or lobar bronchi, divides into a superior segmental bronchi that will supply the, when I say superior segmental bronchi, I mean the one that will supply the superior segment, right, to supply the superior segment. All right. Then it has this one that will supply the anterior basal segment, has a branch that will supply the medial basal segment, the one that will supply the lateral basal segment, and the posterior basal segment. Then the bronchi, conducting bronchi, tegmental bronchi, then it branches into respiratory bronchi. Then this segmental bronchi branches into bronchioles, conducting bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, and finally into the what? Into the alveolar. Alright. All this you can see here. So we've discussed all this in details. So now we're going to be talking about the segments right now. We're going to be talking about the bronchopulmonary segments for the right and the left lung, which is this. We are coming back to this very soon. But let's revise it first. For the right, it has three lobes, right? For the superior lobe, it has three segments: apical, anterior, and posterior. While the middle has two segments: medial and lateral. Then the inferior lobe has five segments: superior, anterior, medial, lateral, and posterior, which I will show you soon. Now for the left lung, it has two lobes, right? Superior lobe and inferior lobe. For the superior lobe, it has apical segment, anterior segment, posterior segment, superior lingual segment, inferior lingual segment. While the inferior lobe has five segments: superior segment, anterior basal segment, medial basal segment, lateral basal segment, and the posterior basal segment. All this we are going to describe now in details. You're going to see it live. All right. So now let's go into that right now.
Alright, so let's talk about the tracheobronchial tree. So I want you to take it easy and then pay attention, focus, you get everything very easy. Alright. So in the next few minutes, you should be able to understand your tracheobronchial tree very well. Alright.
Like this video if you've got some relevant info so far, and give a comment if you've got any question. Okay, you can see the lungs here, right? You have the right and the left, right? And you can see the branches here, right? It divides. There are multiple branches from primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary. Then that's tertiary is the segmental, right? Then from segmental into bronchioles and the rest, bronchioles and the rest. Alright, so now what are these segments? The importance of this segment is every segment has its functionality, it has its function, a particular function it has, and there's a particular segment of blood vessels that supply each segment. So every segment is functional, okay, is important functionally, but anatomically it's not divided into. But in terms of the function, there's need to divide it into segments. All right, so the right and the left lung has what we call the bronchopulmonary segment. Why is it called bronchopulmonary? Because these bronchi, all right, the bronchi, they are going to branch into these regions in different layers. While also the pulmonary vessels, they are going to branch into this segment in layers. All right, so all the pulmonary vessels, when they enter and they divide, they split into the tributaries or into the branches. For arteries, it splits into branches. All right, the branches are going to supply each of these segments. All right, and also going to drain each of these segments. Even the bronchial vessels are going to drain each of these segments. All right, so that's the importance of this bronchopulmonary segment. So now let's look at the anterior view. This is the anterior view, right? You can see here, and here you can find the word posterior view. Here you can find the lateral view, the medial view of the right lung, the inferior view of the right lung. Then this is for the left lung, the medial, the lateral, and the inferior. So now let's start. Let's start with this lateral aspect because that's the side that is more easier than this anterior. Anterior confuses a bit, but we'll come back to it and describe it so you get the details. But let's start with the lateral. Let's assume you're looking at the lung from the lateral aspect. For the lateral aspect, you will find out that the lung is divided. It has three lobes, as we all know: a superior lobe, middle lobe, and what? Inferior lobe, right? And this is the horizontal feature, and this is the oblique feature, right? Now for the superior lobe, is divided into three segments. It has an apical segment, an anterior segment, and a posterior segment. Did you get that? Apical, anterior, and posterior. Now for this middle segment, is divided into a medial segment and a lateral segment. While for the inferior lobe, is divided into this segment you're seeing here is the anterior segment. There's a medial segment, but it's not obvious here. This is the anterior segment. Look at the medial segment. From the medial view, you can find the medial segment here, right? So this is the medial segment. It's obvious in the medial view. So it has a medial segment, it has an anterior segment, it has a lateral segment, and it has a posterior segment. So when we go to the medial view, what are we going to see? This is the superior lobe, right? This is the what? Medial lobe, right? And this is what? The inferior lobe, right? So for the superior lobe, you have what? The apical segment, the anterior segment, and the what? Posterior segment, right? And then for the middle lobe, we have what? The medial segment and the what? Lateral segment. While for the inferior aspect, we have the anterior segment, we have the medial segment, we have the lateral segment here, and we have the posterior segment. Then when we look at it from the inferior aspect, what you can see here, this is the anterior segment. No, this is the medial segment of the middle lobe, right? That's what you can find here. Then this is the whole of the inferior lobe here. This is the anterior segment, this is the lateral segment, this is the posterior segment, and this is the medial segment. So when we are numbering it now, how are we going to number it? Apical segment is 1, posterior segment is 2, anterior segment is 3 of the superior lobe. Then you have what? You have medial segment 4, lateral segment 5. Then now you have this superior segment of the inferior lobe 6. Then you have this anterior segment 7, medial segment 8, lateral segment 9, and the posterior segment 10. So you have 10 bronchopulmonary segments. Alright, so let's try this, whether you can still grab the picture. I just want you to get the 3D picture, get the visualize. Alright, so this is 1 apical segment, anterior segment 2, no, apical segment 1, posterior segment 2, anterior segment 3. Then what do you have? You have this medial segment 4, posterior lateral segment. Okay, the lateral segment is not obvious here. What you can find more here is what? The medial segment, right? Then this is the superior segment of the inferior lobe. This is inferior lobe. This is the superior segment. So what you find here is just 4. 5 is behind. Then here is what? 6. Then what you find next? You find the anterior segment 7, medial segment of the inferior lobe 8. Then the lateral segment of the when they say lateral, I mean lateral basal. Alright, lateral basal. which is what 7. It's okay. Now let's revise, let's recap. So you have the apical segment, right, anterior segment and the posterior segment for the superior lobe. For the middle lobe, you have the medial segment and the lateral segment, right? Now for the inferior lobe, what do you have? You have a superior segment, alright, but now you have this basal area, alright. So this basal area is divided into a medial basal segment, alright. You have the anterior basal segment, alright. You have the lateral basal segment and the posterior basal segment, alright. Then when you look at it here, you have the apical segment here, you have the anterior segment here, and you have the posterior segment for the superior lobe. Then for the middle lobe, you have the medial segment, but you don't see the lateral segment. This is the lateral segment of the middle lobe, but it's not obvious here, right? Then what you can find here is the middle lobe, right? And this is the superior segment of the inferior lobe. Sorry, this is the inferior lobe, right? This is the superior segment of the inferior lobe. Then here you find the medial basal segment, anterior basal segment, lateral basal segment, and the posterior basal segment. Then for the inferior lobe, what do you have? What you can find here is the medial segment of the middle lobe, right? Then here you find the anterior basal segment, medial basal segment, lateral basal segment, then the posterior basal segment. Alright, so that's it for the right lung. So now let's move into the left lung. For the left lung, what do we have now? This is the left lung. We're going to start with the lateral view, alright, so you can get the picture. For this part, you know that the left lung is divided into two lobes, superior lobe and an inferior lobe, right? So for the superior lobe, it has this segment as follows. This is the apical segment, this is the anterior segment, this is the posterior segment, alright. Then it has a superior lingual segment and an inferior lingual segment. That's for the superior lobe. Now for the inferior lobe, it has a superior segment and then it has basal segment. Let's divide the basal segment now. You have an anterior basal, you have a lateral basal, and you have a posterior basal. Now when we look at the medial aspect, you'll now find here, look at the superior lobe here. This is superior lobe. If you notice, this posterior segment of the superior lobe is not obvious here, right? It's only the apical segment and the anterior segment you can find here, alright. Then for the middle lobe, no middle lobe here, remember there's no middle lobe, so you're going to find the superior lingual segment here and the inferior lingual segment here, right? Then for the inferior lobe, now what do you find? This is the superior segment and these are the basal segment. Let's recite the basal segment. For the basal segment, what you can find here, look at the medial basal segment, alright. So the medial basal segment, which is not obvious here, so this is the medial basal segment. Then you have the anterior basal segment, which is obvious here, right? Then you have the lateral basal segment, which is this. Then you have this segment, the posterior basal segment, which is here. This is for the medial and lateral view of the left lung. Now let's look at the inferior aspect. When you're looking at it from the inferior aspect, what do you find here? You find this red area, which is the inferior lingual segment. Then you find the what? Superior lingual segment. Then what do you find here? This is the anterior basal segment, this is the medial basal segment, this is the lateral basal segment, and this is the posterior basal segment. So how do we number it? I believe you've been able to picture this, right? Gotten the picture of this. How do we number it? 1, apical is 1, posterior is 2. Let's look at the right side. Apical 1, posterior 2, the anterior 3. Then let's go to the middle lobe. You have 4, 5. Now let's go to the inferior lobe. You have 6. Then for the medial, for the anterior first, 7, medial 8, then lateral 9, then posterior 10. Alright, so that's what you have here. Now when we go to the inferior aspect, you have let's number now. Apical 1, posterior 2, anterior 3, superior lingual 4, inferior lingual 5, superior for the inferior lobe, superior 6, then the anterior 7, medial 8, then you have your lateral 9, and then the posterior 10. So I believe you got this right. So you have in all 10 bronchopulmonary segments. So I believe you got this right. So when we look at it from these views now, you should be able to identify it here, right? Apical, then here you find what? This is the superior lobe. So you find the anterior, right? You find the anterior segment here, apical anterior segments for this side. Now let's go to the middle lobe. You find the medial segment and the lateral segment on this side. Then what do you find in the inferior lobe? Just you're going to find the more of the anterior segment here, then a little part of the medial segment, a little part of the posterior segment, and a little part of the lateral basal segment. These are basal segments. So these are the anterior basal, this is the medial basal, this is the lateral basal, and this is the posterior basal. No, this is the lateral basal and this is the posterior basal. Alright, now if you look at this, the left side, you can find the apical, right? Apical segment and the anterior segment. Alright, then for the inferior lobe, you have the superior lingual and the inferior lingual. Now here you can find this medial basal, the anterior basal, and then you find the lateral basal, right? So that's what you find here. So you find the lateral basal. So those are the bronchopulmonary segments. All right, so now let's go back to what we're talking about. I want to show you something. So now let's look at this picture so you get the whole thing. We talked about the right lung, right, having 3 lobes, right? For the superior, we talked about apical. You've seen the apical, you've seen the anterior, and you've seen the posterior. Medial, you've seen the medial and lateral. The inferior, you've seen all this lobe, right? That also applies to the left, right? Anterior, apical, posterior, superior, inferior, superior. All right. All this you've seen in the diagram, right?
Alright, so we've learned so much in this minutes. So let's give it a shot. Let's see what we've got. So I believe you already know we've talked about the pleura, we've talked about the tracheobronchial tree, and we've talked about the lungs and the bronchopulmonary segment, right? So I'm going to round up with this. So we talked about the lungs having how many lobes, right? 3 for the right and the left having 2. We talked about it having an apex, the base, surfaces, costal surface, mediastinal surface, and the diaphragmatic surface, right? For both of them. Then it has borders. It has an anterior border, it has a posterior border, and it has an inferior border. Alright. And this is the medial view, right? This is the superior lobe. Then you have your middle lobe, and then you have your inferior lobe here, right? This is the horizontal feature, and this is the oblique feature. Then for this left side, it has the superior lobe and an inferior lobe, right? This is the oblique feature, and this you find here is the ilium. And this is the posterior view, right? This is the superior lobe, inferior lobe for the right, and this is superior lobe, inferior lobe for the left. Alright, we talked about the parts, right? Apex, base, loop, there are 3 of them, superior, middle, and inferior. Surfaces, we have costal, mediastinal, and diaphragmatic. Borders, we have anterior, posterior, and inferior. Then we talked about the segments, the bronchopulmonary segments, right? For the superior lobe, for the right lung, you know we have 3 lobes, right? So for the superior lobe, it has apical segment, anterior segment, and posterior segment. While the middle lobe has what? Medial segment and what? Lateral segment, right? Then for the inferior lobe, it has the superior segment, anterobasal segment, medial basal segment, lateral basal segment, and the posterior basal segment. Then for the left, left has three lobes, right? Then left has two lobes, right? Superior lobe and inferior lobe, right? So for the superior lobe, it has this segment: typical, anterior, posterior, superior lingual, and inferior lingual, which we've talked about, right? And then for the inferior, it has superior segment, anterobasal, medial basal, lateral basal, and the posterior basal. Then we talked about the tracheobronchial tree, right? Trachea bifurcating at the sternal angle into pulmonary bronchi. Then the pulmonary for the right, before entering into the ileum, bifurcates into three: superior, middle, and inferior secondary bronchi. While the left at the ileum bifurcates into two, right? Superior and inferior secondary or lobar bronchi. While each of these bronchi divides further into segmental bronchi that will supply each of those segments which we talked about. There are three segments in the superior. For the right lung, there are three segments in the superior, there are two segments in the middle, and there are 5 segments in the inferior, right? Making it a total of 10. So each of these segmental bronchi will give out 10 branches to each of these segments. Alright. There also applies to the left too, right, and the left side. So that's how this name comes about.
Hey, thanks for sticking around. It's good to have you around. Like this video if you've got some relevant info and share with your friends. If you are new here, we are so delighted having you around. Please feel free to join us across our social media handles. Links are in the description box below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on upcoming videos like this. See you!